Hey everyone! Cuphead is officially 8 years old as of earlier this month, which is very hard to process and makes me feel like an old withering prune at the ripe age of 22. But with that in mind, what better time than now to make another Cuphead video? It's become kind of a yearly tradition at this point for me to make a video about Cuphead. Well, kinda? I haven't actually ever made a video on, the actual video game. However, I have made 2 different videos on some of the worst attempts at replicating Cuphead ever put to screen. Well, I guess both of those situations are a little more complicated than I'm making it out to be, especially for Enchanted Portals. But if you watched the other video, you'd already know that. Speaking of, Enchanted Portals is supposed to get some kind of free DLC later this year. No idea if that's even happening still, but if it's interesting enough, it might get its own video as well. I'm all for the Enchanted Portals redemption arc, so fingers crossed it's actually good. I'd hope for some reworks and improvements to the base game as well, but honestly it's probably better for the devs to focus on making the DLC itself as good as possible, rather than attempting to save the rest of the game. Wow, can you believe it? You might get 2 Cuphead videos in 1 year! Neither of which are actually about Cuphead. Maybe I'll get around to that someday. Although I'd have to find some kind of creative spin on it. Just making a long-ass video on Cuphead itself is probably way too overdone at this point. It is like my favorite game of all time though, so I don't know, never say never. Anyway, as for Enchanted Portal's even more disappointing cousin, Rubber Hose Rampage, it got a few pieces of free DLC shortly after it finally released on Steam, which yes, did actually happen months after it released. But forgive me for not downloading any of it, because I kind of never want to play that game ever again as long as I live, and I think that's a very fair stance.
I'm getting tired of this.
I find it very amusing that fucking Rubber Hose Rampage is one of the only notable things to come out of the copyright for Steamboat Willie expiring. Truly incredible use of the characters. Anyway, that's it for Cuphead Clone News Roundup. There's a few other things, I guess, but most of it is just, this game isn't out yet. Like, remember The Last Cup from the Rubber Hose Rampage video? Still not out. And no idea if it's ever actually coming out, so I guess we'll just wait and see. Okay, let's get into why we're really here. Ladies, gentlemen, and everyone in between, we finally have our first truly decent, dare I say, good Cuphead clone. It only took 7 years, but I am happy to report I have finally played something imitating Cuphead that is actually halfway decent. I know, I'm just as surprised as you. Not only that though, the game, Toyland Tussle by RBW Games, was made by not a team of people, not a trio, not a duo, no. This game was made by one single person. Not only is this insanely impressive for very obvious reasons, but it's even more impressive given just how much more work goes into trying to make a game like Cuphead, specifically with the fluid animations and everything. You can see from the gameplay on screen right now, Toyland Tussle looks great. Easily the closest a Cuphead clone has come to replicating the Rubber Hose animation style seen in Cuphead. However, there is one very important detail I have been ignoring up until this point. This isn't a full game. Well, okay, technically it is a full game, as in you purchase it and there's an ending, but unlike Cuphead, Enchanted Portals, and Rubber Hose Rampage, this is not a boss rush game. It's just a boss game, no rush. Yep. Toyland Tussle is a single fight and nothing more. It's not a demo or anything either. This is the game. Now, personally, this doesn't bother me at all, really. The amount of work that goes into something even as simple as one single Cuphead-style boss is astronomical compared to most other games. And the price tag is low enough that you really aren't getting ripped off or anything by supporting what is essentially a very elaborate piece of art. I do think it's funny, though, that we finally get a good Cuphead clone, but it comes with the caveat that it's just one fight. There's always something, man. There's always something. Even with all that in mind, Toyland Tussle actually has a surprising amount of content for what it is. Let's not waste any more time and just get into it. Strap in, folks. This is the actually good Cuphead clone made by a single person, Toyland Tussle. Also, don't forget to subscribe so I can pass Mr. Beast Espanol in subscribers. But first, this video is sponsored by Raycon. So, you're probably wondering why this segment is still in the classic yeah style, even though FNAF Month 2 is over. Well, I'd love to tell you, but I don't have time. I have to tell you about Raycon's Everyday Earbuds Classic instead, which is much more important. Raycon's Everyday Earbuds Classic are amazing earbuds, packed with upgrades. They've got active noise cancellation, multi-point connectivity, but they also have awareness mode that lets you better hear what's going on around you while still letting you enjoy whatever you're listening to. This is great when you're out at a grocery store or walking a dog. The new colors are awesome. Personally, I'm into Blush Violet. I hadn't seen earbuds in that shade before, and they feel like an accessory that actually fits me. Personally, I love to use my earbuds while researching and working on videos, but they're also great for using around the house or really anywhere that fits into your busy schedule. With 32 hours of battery life, a quick charge feature that gives you 90 minutes of playtime in just 10 minutes of charging, and at half the price of other leading audio brands, you really have nothing to lose trying out Raycon. Click the link in the description box or go to buyraycon.com/yeah to get 20% off site-wide. That's buyraycon.com/yeah. Thank you to Raycon for sponsoring this video. Alright, so how did we even get here? I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of you watching this had never heard of Toyland Tussle before this video. And I'm sure an even smaller percentage of people watching had any idea about this game before its release. I hadn't, that's for sure. Toyland Tussle completely flew under my radar until it had already been out for a few weeks. The timeline of the announcement of Toyland Tussle to its release was actually pretty quick, only getting about 3 months of marketing before it finally dropped. The marketing for Toyland Tussle mainly consisted of Reddit posts by the dev showing off bits and pieces of the game and its development. There isn't a lot to talk about here. There isn't any unused content or anything, but the dev did post a couple videos showing the animation process for the game, which is really cool to see. Toyland Tussle has over 1,000 frames of animation just for the one boss fight, so you can probably see why it took so long for just one person to release something even as small as this. Also, I just want to clarify, I'm not saying that 3 months is a long time. I think this game was probably in development for way longer than that. 3 months was just the marketing period. August 8th, 2025 rolled around, and Toyland Tussle finally released. But like I said previously, I wasn't aware of the game at all until a little bit later. So how did I find out about it then? Well, it's actually kind of funny, because I found out about Toyland Tussle in the most unexpected place probably ever. Spanish TikTok Live. I really don't get that much Cuphead content on my TikTok algorithm, but for some reason, they love showing me live streams of people playing Cuphead, and even fucking Enchanted Portal sometimes. This is gonna sound crazy too, but I saw another one of these Cuphead streams the other day, and it was just some random guy playing the game normally, but he had like insane ass bullet types that just aren't in Cuphead or the DLC anywhere. And I spent like 3 minutes watching him fight Ribby and Croaks in utter confusion. Cuphead was like blasting out fucking rings of fire, and I was very confused. I don't know what happened. Like, I genuinely think I might have slipped into an alternate universe for a second or something. I seriously have no idea. Anyway, back to Toyland Tussle. One particular evening, I kept getting shown streams of specifically Spanish-speaking content creators playing some Cuphead ripoff I had never seen before. I actually kind of just ignored it at first, but it literally just kept happening. I swear, like 5 people showed up on my feed streaming the game. So at that point, I had to tap into one of the streams to find out what the hell was going on. And that's when I found everything out. I played the game for myself that very night, forgot I was gonna do a video on it for a month straight, then I remembered, and now we're here. So shout out to the Spanish Cuphead community for this one. Well, as we often say around here, with that out of the way, how about we actually get into Toyland Tussle proper? Booting into the game for the first time greets you with an amazing opening sequence that explains the story of Toyland Tussle. It's very similar to the in-between aisle animations in Cuphead, but these ones are just still images. Even with that in mind, they look great and work very well to quickly tell the player the game's story before the boss fight begins. Toyland Tussle even does cool details Cuphead didn't do, such as this awesome of the era title card of the boss fight that treats it like it's an old rubber hose short. This is easily one of my favorite details, and it immediately made me realize I was playing something truly special even before the cutscene properly began. The name of the episode is straight up just Toyland Tussle, which makes me think if this game ever got an expansion or something, they'd probably have to rename it. It'd be like calling Cuphead Ruse of a News, which wouldn't make much sense, but that name for a game is actually pretty tough now that I say it out loud. Anyway, up at the top of the title card it reads, A Fodder the Cannon Cartoon, which you can probably guess is the name of the character you play as in Toyland Tussle. I might as well talk about him now, since you'll be seeing him a lot in this opening cutscene. Fodder is a brilliant character design. Not only is the name quite literally perfect, but its design itself does a great job not only looking good, but lending itself to the gameplay as well. In Cuphead, Mugman, and Miss Chalice all shoot their various bullets from their fingers. This is kind of a nonsensical character trait, but it fits perfectly into the game given the wackiness of everything else going on, and the great sound design of the characters snapping their fingers when they shoot a bullet. Cuphead and Mugman also use their actual cup heads for one of the super attacks as well, so the main aspect of their character design is also used well in the gameplay. As crappy as the game is, I do think it's really clever that the characters in Enchanted Portals use their wands to shoot their bullets rather than just directly copying Cuphead. It fits into the game's world effortlessly while also making sense in the context of gameplay. And Rubber Hose Rampage just gave Mickey Mouse a stock PNG of a fucking gun, but you know, we can ignore them, it's fine, it doesn't matter. So, Fodder, literally being a cannon with a long nose he can shoot bullets from, uses the character design excellently while also, once again, making sense from a gameplay perspective. I also love that he has a bit of a sailor motif going on with the hat and scarf around his neck. I think most people associate cannons with pirate ships, so I think the general ocean travel attire works really well here. Anyway, let's actually get into the story of Toyland Tussle now. One day, Fodder is chilling, walking around downtown, trying to find something to spend his allowance on. From the looks of it, his allowance is a single quarter, which adjusted for inflation from 1930 means that he has about $4.50 in today's money. What is he gonna spend that on? Well, I guess whatever cannons like to spend their money on, I guess. Which in this case is toys, if the title of the game didn't give that away. Fodder finds a toy store downtown and decides to walk in. Inside the store, there's a lone music box at the back of the store with its own heavenly light source to boot. Hung below the box is a sign reading off limits, which Fodder completely ignores, and he messes with the music box anyway. And uh-oh, this opens up a fucking vortex in the middle of the store that sucks Fodder into the box. Once in the box, Fodder finds himself in a toy-themed world. Then, all of a sudden, a big-ass toy gorilla shows up and decides, yes, today I will fight this random child. And that's the story. Simple, to the point, and leads us straight into the main event, the fight with Gears the gorilla. Gears is a pretty good boss design. I don't have too much to say about him, but overall I think he works. I do want to mention, however, the very obvious Donkey Kong influence in his design and gameplay, which is easily my favorite aspect about him. Not only is the intro to the title screen music a pretty clear reference to the Donkey Kong arcade startup theme, but he's also holding a barrel on the title screen, uses barrels for an attack during his final phase, and even says, "I'm bigger, faster, and stronger too," in his final phase death quote. Which, like, we all know the fucking DK rap, we know what this is referencing. And hey, I love me some Donkey Kong, so automatically these references make Toyland Tussle a 10 out of 10 from me, baby. Not a single note. Just kidding, I have many notes. Who do you take me for? Let's get into this boss fight. It's the first thing you're gonna notice as soon as the boss fight begins, so let's start with the visuals. I've already talked a little bit about them before, so we don't need to go over the fact that, yeah, the animation here is amazing. Everything here looks phenomenal. What I'd actually like to do here is talk a little bit about some of the specific details of the presentation that really make Toyland Tussle such a great experience. For starters, the background. The backgrounds in Cuphead are genuinely beautiful and deserve all the praise they get. So making anything even close to the quality of those is a major accomplishment. While the background here is fairly simple when you break it down, just being a sky gradient with a few assets put over it and moving clouds, it still absolutely nails the art style it's going for. Hell, There are multiple backgrounds in Cuphead that are even more simple than this one, such as the background for the Grim Matchstick fight, so it really isn't out of place or anything either. Not only does this background nail the look it's going for, it also has a few cool details that make it even better. A pretty obvious one is that the moving clouds on the very bottom layer of the background are being held up by rope, leaning into the concept of this being a toy-themed universe. Like, you could absolutely see these sort of fake clouds being hung from the ceiling of a local toy store. It's a detail that blends in perfectly. The letter blocks towering in the background spell out Gears, which is a cute touch, and the stack of books next to it has a few cool references to Cuphead specifically. Not only is there a book that literally says The Cupmen, like, geez, I wonder what that's referencing, but there's also another book on the bottom of the stack called Devilish Dishes. Now, I guess I don't actually 100% know what this is referencing, but to me, it really feels like this book is a direct reference to the two main final bosses in Cuphead. Devilish for the devil, which, yeah, that's pretty obvious, but the dishes part feels like a reference to Chef Saltbaker. Cause, you know, he's a chef, chefs make dishes, and you help Saltbaker make a dish as the DLC storyline before he fucking backstabs you. So, if that's intentional, that's a pretty awesome reference. These references are something I wanted to highlight because, as far as I remember, neither of the previous Cuphead ripoffs I've talked about had any references to Cuphead, especially none this direct. Enchanted Portals doesn't even mention Cuphead anywhere on its Steam page, which is odd considering the old Kickstarter trailer for the game mentions it as the sole inspiration for the project in the video description. I think having super direct references to Cuphead in Toyland Tussle definitely helps the experience feel more like a passionate homage rather than a soulless cash grab. And that gives the game a lot of goodwill in my book, and I'm sure many other people's books as well. Moving on from the background, Toyland Tussle has a lot of really good event animations. These are the animations that aren't part of any actual boss mechanics, but instead are used for things like transitioning between phases. Whether it be Gears eating a giant ass banana and turning into a fucking rocket ship, or him beating himself up at the end of the fight, these have a ton of personality and add so much to the production value of this game. It's really these seemingly small details that bring the whole experience together and elevate it above something like Rubber Hose Rampage. Which, like, yeah, low ass bar, I know, but you get what I'm saying. Now, as amazing as the animation in this game is, there was always one thing about it that felt off to me, specifically in comparison to Cuphead. It's actually not any of the animation work itself though. It took me a bit to figure it out, but eventually I realized my issue is with our playable character Fodder. Like I said, the actual animations for him are more than fine, but my issue is actually with his line width. For whatever reason, his line work is considerably thinner than the rest of the characters and objects in the game, which doesn't seem like it'd be a problem at all, but in practice, it kinda makes him stand out from the rest of the characters that are supposed to all be in the same art style. This is an issue that Cuphead doesn't have, as all three of the playable characters were designed with thick black outlines like the bosses and enemies. I've never once thought, wow, Cuphead really looks out of place in Cuphead, but I really can't say the same for Fodder. In the grand scheme of things, is this a huge issue? Hell no. But it is pretty much the only gripe I have with the presentation, so I thought I'd at least mention it. Other than that though, and I can't stress this enough, everything else is amazing. I mentioned it earlier, but Toyland Tussle even has death quotes like in Cuphead, which I am shocked this is the first of these ripoffs to do that. The art for these is great, but I kind of wish we also got the boss fight progress bar along with these death quotes. I think this is the dev's first ever game, which is kind of crazy actually, so maybe the progress bar is too hard to implement and that's why it isn't here. I have no idea though. Regardless, what we have is infinitely better than the shitty flop over on the ground animation from Enchanted Portals, so I'll take what I can get. We're pretty much done talking about the visual presentation here, but I'd be a fool if I didn't go over the sound design and music, so let's quickly do that. I've glazed Cuphead's sound design before, so we don't have to go through that again, but I am happy to report that Toyland Tussle pretty much just copies the outline of said sound design while also making it fit the character of Fodder at the same time, which is like, thank God. I'll take that over whatever the hell was happening in some of these other games. Any day of the week. But yeah, replace the snapping bullet sound from Cuphead with a cartoon spit sound effect since, well, duh, and replace the glass shattering sound effect that plays when you get hit with the cartoon explosion sound effect, and boom. There you go. Perfect. It fits the character, and it fits the air of animation it's replicating. What else do you want? Everything else is pretty much just fitting cartoony sound effects for the boss attacks, which obviously fit the game pretty damn well. As for the music, I'm a little conflicted on it. It's definitely trying to be in the same kind of big band style that Cuphead was going for, but it's nowhere near that level, even just ignoring the fact that this is likely digital instruments rather than Cuphead's live studio music. Not that I expected a solo developed indie game to have fucking band music, by the way. Just want to throw that out there. Like, come on now. But just the composition itself here isn't anything to write home about. With that said though, it still is kind of really catchy. I recorded the footage for this game like a month ago, and I hadn't looked at it since, and I still remember what the music sounded like before I heard it again. So take that however you want. I have no idea what the dev's music background is. This could be their first ever song for all I know. But even if it isn't anything crazy, it works well enough. Alright, with all of that out of the way, it's time to get into what we're actually here for, the gameplay. Even Enchanted Portals has moments of looking pretty damn good, but the actual movement, boss, and level design in that game just drags the whole experience down hard. To quote the GOAT Reggie Fils-Aimé, if it's not fun, why bother? So, does Toyland Tussle stick the landing? Yes. Absolutely yes. Is it perfect? No, but it's close, and I don't want to rip my brain out while playing it. Not only is this impressive, since neither of the previous ripoffs could get this part right at all, but this is also the devs' first game, and they pretty much nailed it on the first try. And do you want to know how they nailed it? They pretty much made fodder control the exact same as Cuphead. It's that fucking easy! There are differences, but for the most part, they control about the same. Yeah, isn't this lazy and bad game design? Shouldn't the dev come up with their own movement from scratch? When the hell was the last time you were used for a straw man argument? I don't know, just gotta switch it up from time to time, you know? Keep you on your toes. Okay. Anyway, no, you're wrong. Some of the best parts of the modern gaming scene, especially indie games, is being inspired by or straight up taking existing control schemes from other games and using them to make something completely new and fresh. There are countless examples of this, from small things such as the pogo bounce from DuckTales on the NES being repurposed in Shovel Knight, to Hornet's entire basic movement and animations in Silksong being taken from and inspired by Alucard in Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Silksong is in the Metroidvania genre, you know, like Metroid and Castlevania. So of course it would take heavy influence from the movement of a Castlevania game. So if you're, I don't know, making a Cuphead clone, maybe it'd be smart to take the basic movement from Cuphead. Just some food for thought, you know? Just to drive this point home, I had to play a little bit of Enchanted Portals to fact check something for this video, and I straight up forgot just how bad that game controls. Everything is so stiff and terrible, and it felt extra shit coming directly off playing Toyland Tussle. So yeah, they definitely nailed the controls here, for the most part. Like I mentioned earlier, I do have some gripes with the movement, so let's get into those. For starters, moving on the ground is pretty much perfect. It's a little difficult to make super small, precise movements, which is a bit of an issue for the banana laser attack during the last phase. Don't worry, we'll get to it. But other than that, it's great. Jumping straight up without moving also feels pretty much the exact same as Cuphead. But some problems begin to show up when you start moving in the air, which you kind of do a lot in this game. For starters, fodder feels kind of floaty, which is a little bit of an issue when most of the dangerous attacks in this boss fight are aerial projectiles. On top of that, it feels like fodder moves way too much to the left or right when you try to move him in the air. I just feel like the air movement in general could have been a lot tighter here. It's not so bad to the point where it's unplayable, clearly, but it's definitely still something to note. The dash is, thankfully, pretty much exactly like Cuphead's. I don't think it's super useful for any of the boss's attack patterns here, at least on the standard difficulty, but I'm still glad the dash isn't botched. And yeah, that's pretty much it for movement. If the air movement was cleaned up a little bit, I think this would be pretty much perfect. I really don't have that many complaints outside of that one. Something else I want to bring up here is the actual control scheme for controllers that Toyland Tussle uses. At launch, Toyland Tussle had one single layout for controls, which was eventually updated to include a second option later on. Both of these aren't actually bad or anything, but I do think it's insane that neither of the options have the dash on a trigger button. I always play Cuphead with the dash on trigger, and I'm genuinely a little bit surprised that it isn't the default in that game as well. It just feels so much more natural than having it on another face button when you're already using one of those for jumping. This is obviously a me thing, so I can't get too mad at it, but the option to just rebind the controls would have been nice. At the very least, a third control scheme preset that puts the dash on the left trigger would be beautiful. Anyway, enough about the controls, let's talk about the bullets. The default bullets are pretty much just the ones from Cuphead, just covered in a lot more saliva probably. When I play Cuphead these days, I pretty much exclusively use the default bullets, so I'm glad these are pretty much the same. However, Toyland Tussle doesn't only have the default bullets. There are actually 3 other bullet types you can use that do wildly different things, and even have their own unique super attacks. This was like, by far, the most shocking thing about this game to me. Not only does this give Toyland Tussle a lot more replayability, trying to beat Gears the Gorilla with all the bullet types, but it's really just something that didn't need to be included for a game with just a single fight. It's one of those little details that the dev went out of their way to include just to make the game feel that much more complete, even with how short it is. Before I can get into what the other 3 bullets do though, we should first talk about the super attack system. In the bottom left corner of the screen is a bar that slowly fills up next to fodder's current HP. Once the bar is full, you just press a button to release a super attack, and the bar immediately begins to recharge after you use one. This bar fills up without anything going on, and actually fills up pretty quickly compared to the 5-card system in Cuphead. The obvious elephant in the room here is that Cuphead had the parry system to make getting all 5 cards much easier, so the slow charging made a ton of sense to encourage the player to parry things instead of just waiting around. Cuphead also lets you use individual cards to attack with a weaker version of a super instead of waiting for all 5 cards to charge up, which isn't an option in Toyland Tussle. Toyland Tussle supers are definitely closer to those smaller single card super attacks than the really big ones though, so the faster charging also makes a lot more sense in that regard. So while Cuphead's system is definitely better and has a lot more depth with how you can use the cards, boiling the super meter down to a bar that always charges isn't a terrible change, especially for a game with just one fight. If this were to ever be expanded into something bigger, I definitely want this system to be overhauled so it's a bit more engaging and versatile, but for something as small as this, I don't think it's super necessary. Something kind of noteworthy about actually using the super attacks is that using one pushes fodder back a bit from the position he used the attack in. This means you have to be somewhat mindful about what's directly behind you when using super attacks, because there's always a chance you'll hit something by accident. I don't know how I feel about this. I assume it was done to give the blasting of a really big attack some weight, but it doesn't really come across that way in practice and kind of just feels a little awkward. Maybe this was done for balancing reasons so the super fast charge time for the supers isn't too broken, but it's really just a minor inconvenience at the end of the day that probably could have just been removed from the game without anything being affected, especially in terms of difficulty. Anyway, let's go over the bullets and supers now. I already went over the standard bullets, but the super for them is literally just a big ass bullet that does more damage. Nothing much else to say there. It's pretty much the same as the single card normal bullet super from Cuphead. It's good. Next up are the fireworks, which are pretty much the chaser bullets also from Cuphead. Good for people who are newer to this style of gameplay since you don't have to focus on actually aiming your shots at all, but it makes the bosses take a bit longer to kill in return, which isn't really worth it in my books. The second phase of this fight specifically is genuinely just a spam of bullets when you boil it down to the basics, and that is not something you want to be staying in for any longer than you have to. That being said though, the super for the fireworks actually helps make the weapon slightly less shit, since it does more damage than the super for the normal bullets. Well, in theory at least. These whirl-whiz fireworks move in a circular pattern and only do their max amount of damage if they hit the boss enough times. So you kind of need things to line up super well for this super to be as effective as possible. Compare that to the normal bullet super, which is really only slightly worse and guarantees a set amount of damage every time you hit it on top of the base bullet damage being higher. So yeah, pretty much the fireworks are shit. That's the conclusion here. With all that said, I still think their inclusion here is very important. The fireworks are very good for general audience accessibility, but if you're even remotely decent at Cuphead, these are pretty much never worth using outside of a few times just to try them. Next up, we have the bounce bombs, and these are probably my second favorite bullets in the game behind the default ones. The name pretty much explains what they do. They're bombs, so they come out a bit slower but do more damage, but they also bounce off surfaces and corners if they don't hit a target. It can be really fun to see the bombs go all over the screen when you get the opportunity to set that up, but I definitely think these aren't as efficient as the default bullets. You're gonna be spending a lot of the fight shooting the bombs directly at the boss anyway, so the bouncing aspect isn't even super relevant aside from the occasional moment where it is. So at that point, you might as well be using the normal bullets. I think this bullet type would be a lot more fun if using the bouncing mechanics was actually encouraged, and the more things a bomb bounced off, the more damage it'd do when it finally hit a boss. Obviously that would need to be balanced around that mechanic, but it'd definitely make it stand out more. As it stands though, these are still pretty fun to use even if they are a little inconvenient at times. They definitely shine the most during phase 2 since you can do damage from both sides, but other than that, they're fairly middle of the road. The super, bigger bombs is also something I'm kind of conflicted on. As the name implies, using it sends off bigger bombs, 6 of them to be exact. It says that this super does a little more damage than the normal bullet super, but a little less damage than the fireworks super. But I'm not even sure how that works. It sends off 6 bombs, but each of those bombs definitely doesn't do 30 damage each. So does that mean the individual bombs only do 5 damage? If that's the case, this makes missing even 1 bomb out of the 6 pretty detrimental to the overall damage output here, which just makes the usefulness of this bullet type come into question even more. I will say though, the sound effect that plays when you send out the 6 bombs is probably my favorite one in the entire game. It's so silly, I love it. So yeah, this bullet type could have definitely been a lot better, but regardless, they're still pretty fun to use. I mean, it's a bunch of purple shit bouncing around the screen. What's not to love? Finally, we have the splitter bullet type, which is the most "what are you doing here" bullet type in the entire game. The splitter bullets fire from both the front and the back at a slower pace than the normal bullets, but a faster pace than the bombs. The issue with this is that there's quite literally only one phase where you can use this bullet type to the fullest, that being phase 2. The other phases only have one main target, so dividing the damage like this isn't super useful there. This bullet type would make a lot more sense in a full game with more than just one boss fight, since I'm sure it would have way more uses in that context. But here, I have to wonder why it was even included. Surely another bullet type would have fit this specific boss fight more. I like these more than the fireworks, but that's about it. The super isn't even anything to write home about either, just being a larger version of the splitter bullets, but this time, they phase through bosses and do 6 damage per hit while it's phasing through a boss. You only really get a lot out of this when the boss itself is very large, so you can rack up hits, and that only really applies to the last phase, which at that point, is the overall trade-off of using these bullets even worth it? So yeah, I think the fact that Toyland Tussle even included these bullet types is really cool, but they probably could have been designed a little better around the single boss fight on display here. Okay, I've talked about quite literally everything in this game except for the actual boss fight itself. So how about we end this off by going over the 3 different phases. The first phase starts off with a great intro animation with Gears coming out of his box while Fodder gets scared, and then it throws you right into the action. The main gimmick of this phase is that there are 2 different boxes on each side of the screen that Gears will occasionally move back and forth between. Not only does this keep you on your toes since you're constantly having to readjust your positioning, it also makes the area you can move around in even more strict than it may appear at first. Both of those boxes, regardless if Gears is in them or not, will do damage to Fodder if he touches them. This means you have to be extra careful when doing pretty much anything right in front of a box, which is probably where you'll end up being for most of the phase, since Gears' various attacks kind of force you to go back as much as possible. I think this works very well, and keeps the pressure up even in the early game. As for Gears the Gorilla's attacks, he'll stomp on the ground with his hands to create shockwaves you'll have to jump over, smash cymbals together to create a projectile that I think kind of targets your general position, and finally, he creates music notes that spawn at the top of the screen before dropping down to you one by one. Overall, this phase is fairly simple from an attack standpoint, but the constant changing of directions, mixed with the music notes being pretty tricky to deal with when other attacks are happening at the same time, makes this a properly challenging phase 1 without feeling too impossible to start off. This is also where the dash is probably the most useful, since you can use it to dash through gaps in the music music notes while they're falling. Phase 2 has Gears completely leave the arena as 2 large poles emerge from the boxes and a red and blue monkey respectively slide down them. These guys are Chump and Zeke, and they are essentially minions hired by Gears to do his dirty work. These guys have great designs. I love that they look like little wooden toys connected by jigs, and have insanely expressive faces. Thankfully, their phase is also pretty good, but like I mentioned earlier, it is pretty much just dodging a bunch of different bullets at once. It's not a super bullshit bullet pattern like some of the stuff in Rubber Hose Rampage though. These patterns are thought out and very much dodgeable, leading to a phase that definitely had the potential to be bad, actually being very good. The main gimmick of this phase is not only do you have to dodge bullets from both sides of the arena, but Chump and Zeke will occasionally switch positions on the poles. If one goes high on the pole, the other goes low and vice versa. Similar to Gears switching sides in Phase 1, this makes sure the player is paying attention pretty much the entire time, since it's super important to know which height certain attacks are coming from. The attacks in Phase 2 include a banana guy jumping out of one box, running across the screen, and jumping into the other box, one of the monkeys throwing 3 peanuts at fodder, one of the monkeys taking off and throwing their whole ass head, which bounces around for a bit before going back to whoever threw it, and one of the monkeys throwing a coconut downwards that cracks into 2 projectiles. This kinda sounds like a lot to deal with, and well, it kinda is, but thankfully, each of the attacks are spaced out pretty well, and you probably won't be dealing with more than like 2 attacks at once. It can get super overwhelming though, and it's definitely a step up in difficulty from Phase 1. I don't really know if I have a favorite phase out of the 3, but if I did, I think it would probably be this one. I love when Cuphead fights have multiple bosses as part of the one fight, like Rumor Honeybottom's first phase. And I just think this is a really fun and creative phase with some awesome character designs. That isn't to say Phase 3 is bad or anything, it's also pretty good, but I do think the first 2 phases are probably a little bit better, which is kind of a shame. Regardless, let's go over that final phase. Once Chump and Zeke are defeated, Gears the Gorilla comes back, but this time, he's huge. I don't think there's any explanation for this. I mean, last time we saw him, he was a fucking rocket ship, but Cuphead does stuff like this a lot, so, you know. Like, why the hell was King Dice massive during his boss fight? I don't know, because it looked fucking cool and it made the boss fight better? Who cares? Same shit applies here. The gimmick for this phase is, well, there kind of isn't a gimmick for this phase, other than he's big now. The attacks are also pretty standard as well. We have one where Gears shoots a bunch of barrels into the air that you have to avoid when they crash back down on the ground, one where he sends his fist to the foreground to try to punch you, and one where he summons a dancing banana that shoots a bunch of laser beams downwards. The first 2 are pretty easy to dodge, all things considered. There's quite a lot of time between the tells and when the attacks actually land, but this fuck-ass dancing banana is by far one of the most evil attacks in the whole game. Like I mentioned earlier, it's kind of hard to make super small, precise ground movements in Toyland Tussle, and this attack requires you to do them, so you can see how it would be a little bit of a pain in the ass. The beams also come out super fast on the first blast, which gives you almost no time to react to where the beams spawn. Most of the time when I got hit or died to this attack, it was literally just because part of my foot or something was touching the beam. I feel like this whole attack could have been balanced a little bit better, so the shots aren't as thick, while also giving the player a little bit more time to react to the first blast. Other than that though, that's it for Phase 3. All the attacks feel very separated from each other, which is not the case for the previous 2 phases, where each of the attacks would stack in cooler, unique ways. Here it's just 3 different big-ass attacks to dodge. Have fun, I guess. Even with that in mind though, this fight is still pretty freaking good, and shows some pretty decent understanding of what made Cuphead bosses so fun in the first place, so I have to give the dev props for that. Upon finally defeating Gears in Phase 3, a great death animation plays that I mentioned earlier, and then it goes straight into the results screen. This is pretty much just a super simplified version of the results screen from Cuphead, boiling it down to how long it took you to beat the boss, how much health you had at the end of the fight, and if you were playing on the harder difficulty or not. I should probably mention this while it's relevant, but yeah, there is a slightly harder version of this fight you can do as well, which is great for replay value. This version just makes some attacks faster and adds more projectiles to other attacks, but other than that, it's not super noteworthy for this video. Still cool it's there though. With Gears finally defeated, now we get to see the conclusion to Toyland Tussle's story. Apparently, Gears wasn't actually trying to fight fodder this whole time, and actually just wanted to know where he came from. Which, like, yeah, right, buddy. Okay. You do not do all that if you simply wanted to know where someone came from. Like, you literally sicked your cartoonishly evil monkey henchman on him, dude. You are not innocent. And then fodder's like, yeah, sorry about me shooting you repeatedly, by the way. I was just scared. Basically, what I'm understanding here here is we could have avoided all of this if we just used more than like 2 words at first. Okay, got it, cool. Gears makes Chump and Zeke help Fodder get home, and with that, he finally returns to the toy store. As soon as he gets back though, the owner of the store chases him out, and that's where the story ends. What did we learn, folks? I don't know, but I definitely won't fuck around with giant toy monkeys with deadly weapons, okay? Oh, and I guess don't touch things you're not supposed to. I guess that's a lesson too. Sure. And with that, we are officially done here. So, let's wrap this up. I am genuinely just so happy something like Toyland Tussle exists. Even if it's short, even if it isn't perfect, it finally, for once, shows that a game inspired by Cuphead can absolutely be good if it's in the hands of the right people, or the right person in this case. All the way back in the Enchanted Portals video, I expressed that I was one of the few people actually excited for that game way back when the Kickstarter launched, because the idea of more Cuphead to play just sounds amazing to me. That game being bad, whether it's the fault of the devs or something else outside of their control, was truly one of the biggest letdowns for me of all time. So to finally even have a taste of what that game could have been under the right circumstances, it's just amazing. I really hope RBW Games keeps making stuff. They clearly have a lot of talent, and I can't wait to see what they do next, Cuphead clone or not. A full version of this game would literally be peak though, just saying. And like I said at the start, I really hope the free DLC they announced for Enchanted Portals is good. Truly. I am always up for a redemption arc. Anyway, I think that's enough out of me. Thank you all so much for watching. I've been Yeah, and I'll see you all next time.